Was there a moment or a snapshot in time where you recall you could see things beginning to change for the better when we look back at the COVID situation?
I think you have to relate that to vaccination. I'm not sure when we really realised that vaccination, which normally would take 10 to 15 years to develop, had been compressed safely into this very short period of time. And the drug companies, the public sector, the governments had come together in this unique scientific partnership. And then we started to use it. We started to use it quickly. Cases were still rising and deaths were falling. And that didn't make any sense from our previous experience of this horrid disease. So I think that scientific breakthrough was amazing.
Is there a memory you look back on now and think, wow, was that really me?
Peak COVID comms, and the day probably my mum was proudest. I mean, I got a doctorate from this university that's dulled by the fact I got on Lorraine. So when I was on Lorraine on daytime ITV, that seemed to create the biggest fuss amongst my family, never mind my honour from the Queen or my doctorate from Glasgow University. Lorraine was peak COVID.
Is there anything that you think that we in Scotland or Glasgow did that made you feel particularly proud of our response to COVID?
Well, apart from the science, which we've talked about, clearly the scientific advances were partly universities and partly higher education institutions like this one. The kindness of strangers, I think, was striking. So I learned the mobile phone numbers of my neighbours because they put slips through the door and said, we know you're quite busy, do you need us to get your shopping? Or I live quite near the Sikh Gurdwara in Glasgow, and they were making 3,000 curries a day and taking them on the road to people who couldn't leave their houses. We pretty much got rid of rough sleeping during the first wave of the pandemic. So if we can do that with community spirit, with people opening their buildings, with people reaching out to the community with kindness, I hope we can keep some of that. So that's not unique to Glasgow. Lots of places did that around the world, but I definitely felt it here that we were able to do something that felt like an extra step, particularly for those who were more at risk of this disease.
If you could go back and give your younger student self one piece of advice, what would it be?
I think it's a cliche actually, and I'm not sure it works for young people. And it's to drink from the fire hose and keep your options as wide as you can in those early stages. Time feels shrunk, I think, when you're at university. You feel as though the decision you make next is going to be it. It's going to be the life decision. You're going to choose that career. You're going to choose that direction. That's certainly what it felt like for me in the 80s and the 90s. It's not true. It's an illusion. And it's even more of an illusion, I think, now in the modern world where people move and change more often. So keep your options open, but also take every opportunity you can. I had a wonderful privilege of going to Boston for a year randomly, and that's where I did my public health degree, and I didn't know that 10 years later there would be a pandemic. You can only work that out retrospectively. You don't know what that's going to look like when you're in the moment. I think the pandemic is a really important moment globally for us, and I hope that those who graduate now realise that it has exposed our deep inequalities both in this country and globally. So Scotland is only one little part of this whole global challenge, and I think graduates in whatever specialty they're in will have some appreciation for that inequalities agenda that I hope they will address in whatever they do now.